If you don't have your book, you might want to hit pause and get your book so you can follow along. You might even want to mark a few things. Page 166, we're looking at biases. And in the critical analysis, you'll be asked to explore possible biases in a piece. A bias is, your book says, is commonly defined as an unfair judgment or an unreasonable point of view that's resistant to change. That's what a bias is. An opinion isn't a bias. It's a bias if it won't respond to reason. New evidence doesn't change it. New ideas don't make it move at all, then it's a bias. And we often have biases because of our worldview. The last class we were together briefly discussed worldview. Worldview is a way that you view the world. All of us have one, whether we're aware of it or not. And had we not been interrupted by this crazy protocol, we would have developed that a little more in class. I think it's useful for you to determine what your worldview is, what you believe about how we got here. Is the world just a cosmic accident? Is there a divine creator? Do we have a purpose in life, or do we just create our own purpose? I mean, there are heavy issues that are answered by worldviews. And the problem is a worldview is a way of looking at the world. And there's only one way at a time, really. I'm pulling these glasses. Everything looks different. I really don't need these now. The world hasn't changed. My ability to see is different. I don't go shopping for paint wearing these puppies. They don't work well for that. When I go outside, it helps me to see. I used to have a pair that were polarized, and they actually would help me look at the water, see under the water, and see fish. It reduced the glare. I take my glasses off, there's just glare everywhere. Put my glasses on, I can see fish swimming, but now I am not seeing something else. Whatever worldview you have will not allow for, I won't say the complexity of the world, but the details of the complexity. I, for example, I have it goes back the second day, non-overlapping magisteria. There are times I have a very scientific worldview, and I can see what's happening there, but my scientific worldview will not allow me to see things that are not scientific in nature. Just like a religious worldview will not allow you to look at things that are scientific nature sometimes. We'll develop that more thoroughly. We will discuss that later. Sometimes people think science is the end-all be-all for every question. Well, it can't be, assuming there's questions outside of the material universe. That's an assumption. Again, assumptions are a huge part of this, where we are just thinking, okay, there's something we hold as being true. And I'm convinced most views tend to be based largely on assumptions, things that are taken for granted as being true that may or may not be in actuality. And your book developed this some. There's some fun things here about food. That's a huge area of bias, is food. Why do we not like certain foods? You're biased against it. Well, open up your mind. That's probably a good idea. I mean, who's thought that critical thinking would have anything to do with food, but it does. Now, this would have been a great class. This is the class everybody loved most. In fact, I had a student last semester who was the best class he ever had, high school, college. We would go through these different ideas and discuss it. The problem is, and this is where bias comes in, the exercise forces us to be biased. It really does. Some of them especially, because we have to agree or disagree, and we don't have a choice. And the problem is many times there are nuances. I can't come out for number one, by the way, and just say certain sexes are better at certain jobs and tasks. I can't say that. I can't completely agree with it, but I don't disagree with it either. So if I was to make an A or D, either way, I'm afraid I'm on shaky ground. I mean, we can't say that sexes are naturally better at performing certain jobs. I mean, we're assuming a lot. Okay, what is a male and female? Well, there's certain things where maybe it's true. I mean, a man can't give birth. He just can't do that. In jobs that require great physical strength, men have an edge. In fact, there was an article not too long ago that was published in Atlantic Monthly that said that the title on the front of the magazine was The End of Men. And what it was getting at was in the postmodern world, men no longer have an edge. It used to be men had an edge in the workplace because so much of work was very physical. And if it's a very physical job, we have the edge. I'm sorry. I had an ex-girlfriend who was a carpenter, and she told me, I saw her, after we broke up and all. I remember her telling me she was a carpenter. I said, "You're a carpenter? You must be kidding me. I can't see you standing up a wall." And she told me, "Well, I don't do that kind of carpentry where she did big framing and pushed up walls. I've done that. And it worked me hard, but this girl was 5'2", and if she weighed 100 pounds, that was stretching. And she said, "Well, no, I can't do that kind of work. I'm not strong enough." But she was an excellent trim carpenter. She actually showed me some of her work, really talented. There's a reason we have male and female differences in sports. Men tend to have more muscle mass. That's just the way it is. Pound for pound, we're going to have more muscle. Now, there's also the idea that women are more compassionate. They're more, empathetic, etc. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe we need to reconsider what men and women really are. But what evidence do we have for the view that we have? Well, there's evidence out there that supports my response we're better at different jobs than others. The physical capabilities, etc. But it's limited, and there are assumptions. Some of these, it's huge. The idea that, here's a big one, a person's sexual orientation is something he or she is born with. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Again, do I agree, disagree? I'm not totally sure. I actually did some research on that because I was curious. And I'm not making this up. I researched a bunch of places, and one very interesting article I found on a website that was called Social Inquiry. I mean, emphasis on the query. It was a gay advocacy site. And they had an article there that said there are 6 reasons why a person isn't born gay. And I thought, well, gee, that's novel, because I kind of thought it would go the other way. This is a huge issue. Is a person really born gay, straight, bisexual, or whatever? Well, they contended not so. Part of the reason they contended was, first of all, just because it's politically advantageous doesn't mean it's true. And it is politically advantageous. What she meant by that, the woman, the lesbian woman who was writing, was that if we can say if people are born gay, then, it helps because, hey, they can't help it if they're born gay. It's just like you're born with brown hair or you're born a particular race. And she said that's politically advantageous to a point, if that's true. She doesn't believe it's true. Because, hey, if we said that that's really true, then what's going to stop people from saying, oh, gee, we've identified the gay gene? It's kind of like with Down syndrome. Now we have tests where, okay, if a child is genetically going to be born with Down syndrome, often parents now choose to abort. And she was contending it's politically advantageous to a point, but taken to its extreme, we could wind up with gay abortions. So that's not so great. Another thing she said was that the science is not conclusive at all. There have been people who said, okay, they've done autopsies on gay men's brains, and they're different than straight men's brains, but unfortunately those tests, you can look these up and you can find the article if you want, but they were done largely on men who had passed away because of HIV complications, and that's not really a good data set to be looking at as somebody who's been ravaged by disease. Twin studies, by the way, that's where, and twins are fascinating to scientists. People who are genetically identical are born, and scientists want to look at them. How are they different? Well, they have found that identical twins, genetic twins, if you're born that way, you have only a slightly higher chance of being gay. Like if you have a gay brother and you're his genetic twin, you are more likely to be gay also. Well, the problem with that is, first of all, statistically, it's not very significant increase. And secondly, identical twins tend to get raised in the same circumstances. So therefore, maybe that's what's causing any tendency toward being homosexual. That's another point that she got at, was the notion that just because you felt this way your whole life doesn't mean you're born that way. And and she contended, and there's a lot of truth to this, that none of us remember what we were like when we were born. And by the time you have an awareness of sexuality, you have already had a lot of influence. In fact, I find it depressing that social scientists and psychologists are contending that really a lot of our makeup is set by the time we're about age 2, which makes me super sad because I don't remember anything before age 2 except for one little incident. And my granddaughter's not 2 yet. It makes me sad that she's probably not going to remember all this great stuff she's done with me. But what's been happening to her and what happened to me before I was 2, people are thinking has a profound effect on us. So we can't say a person's born that way necessarily. So, and okay, is there some genetic predisposition maybe? Well, maybe there is, but we can't come right out and say that your sexual orientation you're born with. I mean, that's just not good thinking because it's much more complex than that. And that's the problem with most of these questions. It's better to be religious than not to have a religion. Well, there's a whole raft of assumptions there. Okay, there's studies out there that seem to indicate that people who are religious tend to fare better in some ways. They tend to stay married. They tend to, not be as clinically depressed, et cetera, than the bulk of the population. That's only to a point. And then it also depends on religion. I mean, okay, there's certain religions I'm not sure you want to have. I mean, they're kind of a rare sect, but down in Appalachia, they're snake handlers. It's part of their religion to pick up rattlesnakes and handle them because it shows you have faith and stuff. And I'm not sure that's really a good thing to have. So all these views tend to be rather extreme by nature, and most things are more heavily nuanced than that. The problem is bias is hard to overcome because it's anchored a lot in assumptions. I hope you read these ideas. Using language to determine bias, you'll be discussing that later. Loaded language you want to look for. Certain words are just loaded. Things like bums are homeless because they're lazy. Bum is a loaded word. Lazy is a loaded word. Every doctor knows how to treat his patients. That's an overstatement. Not every doctor does. It's also sexist. His patients implies that doctors are men. Zealotry, that is a loaded word. A zealot is somebody who's just over the top with things. Not every animal activist is a zealot who knows no bounds. Most animal activists would not blow up a laboratory that does animal experimentation, for example. Corrupt politicians want to raise taxes on honest, hardworking Americans. Those are extreme terms. Honest, hardworking Americans. That's the general population? I don't think so. Are all politicians corrupt? Greedy corporations, something? These are all extreme statements of language that don't allow for the nuances. And so that's something that we'll be looking at. Chapter 5, the ideas here aren't going to be on the midterm, but they spill over into some of the concepts in 6 and 7 as we analyze, as we pull apart, as we evaluate different pieces of writing. And you have a big assignment at the end that will be addressing that. You have a smaller assignment that's coming up, and it's on the plan. There's the smaller assignment is worth 125 points, and I don't say it's smaller because it's shorter, but it is less complex than the critical analysis. And we'll be launching that very soon. In the plan, the schedule, you can look at it. There's things to read, things to look at. Please read the textbook information. Look at the criteria sheet. Look at the forms. And read the essay. Don't fill out any forms. We'll talk about that later on. But you want to definitely read and see what's happening, get an idea of what it's about, and we'll elaborate on that later. Plus, there's some cool things to look at in the textbook. Chapter 6 has information that will have bearing on you doing that final paper, and those ideas will be on the final. So hopefully you're in good stead, you're in good health, and I'm running out of time, and if I say more, it would be silly. So I'm just going to tell you, check online, make sure you know what you need to read and do before next time, and we'll talk to you then. In the meantime, be well, stay safe, keep your social distance, and God bless you. Bye.